They told me to stand in the corner and pour water, so I did. My brother was too busy bragging about becoming a new partner to notice that the person filling his glass held the deed to the building and the debt he was drowning in. He thought he was moments away from a promotion, but in less than 10 minutes, his biggest brag was about to become his most expensive confession. My name is Adeline Lawson, but in this room, inside the boardroom of Hawthorne Crest Holdings in Port Halston, names were secondary to net worth. And right now, my net worth was apparently insufficient to warrant a seat at the table. Adeline, move, my mother, Marianne, hissed under her breath. She didn't shove me physically. She rarely made contact if she could avoid it. Instead, she used a sharp, dismissive flick of her wrist, the kind one might use to shoo away a stray cat or a waiter who lingered too long with the bill. You are cluttering the view. Stand in the corner by the credenza. Handle the water. And for the love of God, do not say a word to embarrass this family. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my charcoal gray suit, a suit I had paid for with my own salary, and walked silently to the corner of the room. I picked up the heavy crystal pitcher, the condensation cold against my palm, and assumed the position she wanted. Furniture. I was just furniture. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the theater my family called a business meeting. My father, Graham, sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his face flushed with that specific shade of red that meant he was gambling with money he did not strictly have. To him, his children were never people. We were lines on a ledger. My brother, Trent, was his growth stock, volatile, exciting, promising infinite returns despite a history of crashes. I was the maintenance cost, necessary to keep the lights on, perhaps, but ultimately a drain on resources he would rather deploy elsewhere. Trent was vibrating in his seat. He adjusted his silk tie for the third time in 60 seconds. He was playing the part of the tycoon, preparing for the signing that would make him a new partner at Waverly and Company Capital. The name sounded prestigious, dripping with old money and exclusivity. To the unseasoned ear, it sounded like an invitation to the upper echelons of finance. To me, it smelled like a trap. It smelled like high-yield promises covering a liquidity crisis. But nobody asked about the maintenance cost for her opinion on the structural integrity of the building. I slid my left hand under the cuff of my blazer and checked my watch. 4 minutes. In exactly 4 minutes, the due diligence representative from the investment firm was scheduled to walk through those double oak doors. The air in the room was thick with a cocktail of cologne and terror. My parents were terrified of being judged, of being found wanting by this stranger who held the keys to Trent's imaginary kingdom. They were frantically whispering to each other, rehearsing their lies, making sure the facade of the Lawson Empire looked polished enough to hide the rot underneath. I poured water into a glass, the ice clinking softly. The sound made Trent jump. "Easy, Addie," he snapped, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nerves are tight. Big day. You wouldn't understand the pressure of a deal like this." I didn't answer. I just set the glass down on a coaster. He was right. I didn't understand the pressure of his deals because my deals were real. I looked at him and saw the ghost of the boy he used to be. The golden child. I remembered the time he crashed Graham's vintage Jaguar into a tree when he was 17. Graham had paid off the police, paid off the property owners, and bought Trent a new BMW to soothe his trauma. When I won the state mathematics decathlon that same year, Graham had sighed and asked why I couldn't be more charismatic like my brother. "You have a boring life, Adeline," Marianne had told me once over a holiday dinner, waving her wine glass at me. "Government compliance? Risk analytics? It sounds so dry. Just a low-level clerk's life." They didn't look closely enough. They didn't see that while Trent was burning cash on failed startups, a nightlife app that no one downloaded, an artisanal tequila brand that got sued for copyright infringement, I was climbing. I was learning the architecture of debt. I was learning how to strip a company down to its bones and see where the bodies were buried. I paid off my student loans in 3 years. I bought my own apartment. I built a portfolio. But to Graham, independence was an insult. I remembered the night I told him I wouldn't be joining the family business to clean up Trent's accounting errors anymore. He had looked at me across the Sunday roast, his knife screeching against the china, and delivered the sentence that had finally severed the last thread of my loyalty. "You are ungrateful," he had said, his voice low and trembling with rage. "Investing in you was the biggest loss of my life. At least Trent takes swings. You just take up space." I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't flipped the table. I had simply eaten my peas. That silence was my armor. Over the years, my silence had become a heavy steel vault, and inside it, I locked away every slight, every dismissal, and every piece of financial intelligence I gathered on them. They thought I was quiet because I was submissive. They didn't realize that you have to be quiet when you're hunting. 3 minutes. I looked at the empty chair at the end of the table where the representative would sit. My family was sweating, adjusting their cuffs, checking their teeth in the reflection of their phone screens, terrified of the man coming to evaluate them. The irony was suffocating. They were terrified of the employee. They should have been terrified of the girl in the corner with the water pitcher, because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly conceive in their wildest arrogance, was that the mystery investor behind the acquisition of their debt wasn't some faceless corporation in New York. The entity that now held the deed to their office, the lien on their home, and the trigger to their entire financial existence was standing 10 feet away from them. I watched Trent again. He opened his leather portfolio, staring at the documents inside as if they were written in a foreign language. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He laughed at something Graham said. A hollow, barking sound. It was the laugh of a man who had already jumped off the cliff, but was still trying to convince the onlookers that he knew how to fly. He was bragging about being a partner. He was preening about his new title. He had no idea that the ink wasn't even dry on the paper. And I had already bought the company that was hiring him. 2 minutes. "Adeline," Graham barked, not looking at me. "More water for your mother. And stand up straight. You look like you're waiting for a bus." "Of course. Father," I said. My voice was calm, perfectly level. I walked over and poured the water. As the cool liquid filled the glass, I looked at the reflection of the room on the surface. I saw 3 people who thought they were the main characters of a tragedy, unaware that the genre had shifted. This wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a foreclosure, and the bank was open for business. To understand why I was standing in that corner holding a pitcher of ice water, you have to understand the ecosystem of the Lawson family. We were not a family in the traditional sense. We were a failing corporation that refused to file for bankruptcy. Graham, my father, was addicted to gambling on his honor. He treated his reputation like a line of credit that could never be maxed out. Marianne, my mother, was in the public relations department, obsessed with maintaining a facade of old money elegance even when the foundation was rotting with termites. And Trent? Trent was the product. He was addicted to being told he was special. For the last decade, I had watched from the sidelines as Trent burned through capital with the efficiency of a forest fire. First, there was the mobile application that was supposed to revolutionize dog walking, but never made it out of beta testing. Then there was the craft gastropub in the trendy district that hemorrhaged money, because Trent insisted on importing Italian marble for the bar top while refusing to pay his vendors. Then came the boutique consulting startup that consisted entirely of him buying expensive suits and taking 3-hour lunches, every time a venture collapsed. Graham was there with his checkbook. He never called it a bailout. He called it a bridge loan. He called it an investment in Trent's learning curve. He called it stabilizing the asset. I saw it differently because that is what I do for a living. While Trent was playing business, I was actually in it. I work for Redwood Ledger Advisory in the Risk and Compliance Analytics Division. My job does not involve ribbon-cutting ceremonies or 3-martini lunches. I spend my days deep in the bowels of corporate balance sheets, hunting for the kind of structural weaknesses that bring empires down. I learned to spot a Ponzi scheme by its cash flow signature and a desperate CEO by the clauses in his contract. I climbed the ladder at Redwood quietly. banking my bonuses, paying down my mortgage, and driving a 6-year-old sedan that Marianne refused to ride in because it smelled like mediocrity. I understood the psychology of sunk cost better than anyone in that room. Graham could not stop pumping money into Trent because stopping would mean admitting that he had been wrong for 30 years. It would mean acknowledging that his golden boy was actually fool's gold. So he kept doubling down, throwing good money after bad, terrified that if he stopped, the illusion would shatter. This time, however, the stakes were different. This was not a few $1,000s for a liquor license. Trent needed $175,000 to buy his way into the partner track at Waverly & Company Capital. He did not have the money. Of course he didn't. But he had convinced Graham that this was the big one, the final rung on the ladder that would justify every previous failure. He had convinced our father to take out a second mortgage on the retirement property at Briarstone Drive. The only unencumbered asset they had left. Trent sold it as an investment. I saw it for what it was. Waverly & Company Capital was not a standard investment firm. It was a predatory structure designed to harvest vanity. They operated on a model that bordered on a pyramid scheme for the wealthy. They recruited partners not based on talent or track record, but on their willingness to pay an exorbitant buy-in fee. They promised high returns and exclusive access to deal flow, but the contracts were a labyrinth of lock-in periods and capital call obligations. They fed on people like Trent, men who were desperate to be important and too arrogant to read the fine print. 2 weeks ago, a red flag had popped up on my dashboard at Redwood. We track distressed entities for large institutional clients who are looking to buy debt pennies on the dollar. The algorithm had highlighted Waverly. Their cash flow was erratic. Their recruitment fees had spiked by 40% in the last quarter. They were bleeding operating capital and desperately needed an influx of fresh cash to pay off their maturing obligations. They were not hiring partners. They were hunting for donors. When I first saw the report, my instinct was familial. It was a reflex. Twitching like a phantom limb, I reached for my phone to call Graham. I wanted to tell him that Waverly was a sinking ship looking for passengers to chain to the deck. I wanted to bring the file to dinner and show them the math. Then I remembered my 30th birthday last month. I remembered arriving at the family estate to find that they had turned it into a networking mixer for Trent's new contacts. I remembered Marianne handing me a tray of crab cakes and asking me to circulate because the catering staff was short-handed. I remembered a man asking Trent who I was, and Trent laughing, swirling his scotch, and saying I was just the girl who did the paperwork, a reliable little calculator with no vision. I sat at my desk at Redwood, the phone in my hand, and I let the screen go dark. Why should I save them? If I warned them, Graham would scream that I was jealous. Trent would accuse me of trying to sabotage his success. Marianne would sigh and tell me I was being negative. They would ignore the data, sign the check anyway, and when the inevitable collapse happened 6 months later, they would blame the market, the economy, or the government. They would never learn. I realized then that you cannot save people who are addicted to their own destruction, but you can profit from it. I opened a new window on my computer. I pulled up the corporate filings for a dormant holding company I had established years ago for personal investments. I looked at the debt structure of Waverly & Company Capital. They were over-leveraged and vulnerable. There was a block of distressed debt available for purchase, a controlling tranche that carried with it specific lenders' rights regarding governance and compliance oversight. It was expensive. It would cost me a significant portion of my liquid savings and require me to liquidate some conservative positions. But the return on investment was not just financial, it was existential. I did not want to be the daughter who cried wolf. I wanted to be the wolf. So I did not call Graham. I did not text Trent. Instead, I contacted my broker. I instructed him to execute the purchase of the Waverly debt through my blind trust, Juniper Vale Holdings. I spent the next 48 hours reviewing the covenants attached to that debt. I discovered that as the new primary creditor, I had the right to demand immediate compliance audits of any new partners being onboarded. I had the right to verify the source of funds. I had the right to reject any capital injection that smelled of fraud or instability. I was not going to stop the signing ceremony. I was going to let it happen. I was going to let Trent walk into that room believing he was the king of the world. I was going to let Graham sign away his retirement home. I was going to let them build their tower of cards as high as they possibly could, because the higher they built it, the more kinetic energy the collapse would generate. I closed the file on my computer and went back to work. When the invitation to the signing came, I replied that I would be there. I did not offer to bring wine. I did not offer to help with the setup. I simply showed up, put on my invisible suit, and took my place in the corner. They thought I was there to witness their glory. They had no idea I was there to foreclose on it. Most people in this room believed that power was something you displayed. They thought it was the cut of your suit, the volume of your voice, or the logo on your business card. They were wrong. Real power is invisible. It is the silent current that runs beneath the floorboards, capable of electrifying the entire house with the flip of a single switch. My family saw me as Adeline the analyst, the girl who stared at screens and formatted reports for a salary. What they did not know was that for the past 5 years, I had been building something far more significant than a savings account. I was not just an employee at Redwood Ledger Advisory. That was my cover, my day job, the boring answer I gave at cocktail parties to make people walk away, in the shadows, utilizing a network of blind trusts and offshore entities. I operated Juniper Vale Holdings. It sounded like a quaint retirement community or a vineyard, which was intentional. In reality, Juniper Vale was a predatory investment vehicle designed for one specific purpose: purchasing distressed debt. I bought the bad decisions of other companies, stripped them for parts, and enforced the terms that desperate CEOs signed when they had no other options. My family thought Waverly and Company Capital was a prestigious club. To me, it was just another carcass on the savannah. 48 hours ago, while Trent was picking out his tie for this meeting, I had executed a blitzkrieg acquisition. Through Juniper Vale, I had purchased a controlling tranche of Waverly's toxic debt. The firm was so desperate for cash that they had not bothered to look closely at who was buying their paper. They just saw the wire transfer and signed the new credit agreement. Hidden within page 42 of that agreement was a clause I had drafted myself. It was a standard lender's rights provision, but with a twist. It granted the primary creditor, me, absolute authority over internal compliance and the vetting of any new equity partners during periods of financial restructuring. That was the key. I now owned the door my brother was trying to walk through. The man coming to this meeting, the one my parents were so terrified of impressing, was not a Waverly employee. His name was Miles Crow. To the outside world, he looked like a high-end auditor, the kind who billed by the minute and smiled only when he found a mistake. In reality, Miles was my personal head of security and compliance. I had poached him from a forensic accounting firm 3 years ago after seeing him dismantle a fraudster in a deposition with nothing but a highlighter and a stack of bank statements. He was loyal to the paycheck, and I signed the checks. Before I left my apartment this morning, I had given Miles a single, precise instruction. He was not here to stop the signing. He was not here to fail Trent on a technicality. He was here to apply pressure until the pipe burst. Verify liquidity. I had told him over our encrypted messaging app, push for the source of funds, make him prove the money is real. If he lies, do not stop him. Let him put the lie on the record. That was the cruelty and the beauty of my plan. If I had simply canceled the meeting, Trent would have spun it as a missed opportunity. He would have told Graham that the investors got cold feet, that the market shifted, that it wasn't his fault. He would have remained the victim of circumstance. I needed to take away his ability to spin the narrative. I needed him to commit a tangible, traceable act of fraud. I needed a timestamp. I adjusted the position of the water pitcher on the credenza. Moving it 2 inches to the left, the boardroom was the perfect stage. By allowing the meeting to happen here, in the very heart of the Lawson family's deluded grandeur, I kept their guard down. They saw me standing in the corner, and their brains registered servant. It made me invisible. It meant they would speak freely in front of me. It meant Trent would not hesitate to look at his sister and see a piece of furniture, never suspecting that the furniture was recording every breath he took. But I was not reckless. I knew that cornered animals bite, and my father had a temper that could turn physical when his pride was threatened. I touched the sleek black phone in my pocket. It was currently running a background script. If I did not enter a specific passcode every 15 minutes, a dead man's switch would activate. It would automatically email a zipped file to 3 different attorneys and the district attorney's office. That file contained the entire paper trail: the debt purchase, the compliance logs, the recording of this meeting, and a sworn affidavit regarding Trent's financial history. I had built a cage of light and data, and I was waiting for them to step inside and lock the door themselves. Across the room, Trent was beaming. He slapped Graham on the shoulder, a gesture of masculine camaraderie that looked practiced. "This is it, Dad," Trent said, his voice booming with false confidence. "Once I sign, we are in the big leagues. I'm going to be a partner, a managing partner. The title alone is worth $1 million in leverage." Graham nodded, his eyes misty. "I knew you had it in you, son. I knew you just needed the right vehicle." I watched them, my face a mask of polite indifference. Trent turned to me, catching my eye for a fleeting second. He winked. It was a condescending, arrogant little twitch of his eyelid. "Wish me luck, Adeline," he said, loud enough for Marianne to hear. "Maybe when I'm running the place, I'll hire you to do the filing. Keep it in the family." "Good luck, Trent," I said softly. I looked at the clock. 1 minute left. He thought he was becoming a partner. He thought he was buying into a legacy. He had no idea that the company he was joining had already been hollowed out, gutted, and restructured by the sister he mocked. He wasn't joining a firm. He was walking into a bear trap that I had set with 6 figures of my own money. I poured another glass of water, watching the bubbles rise to the surface and burst. "Today, I'm a partner," Trent whispered to himself, rehearsing his opening line. I took a sip of my own water and thought, yes, Trent, you are a partner in a crime scene. The heavy oak door's handle turned, the latch clicked. It was the sound of the first domino falling. Miles Crow was here. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open, not with a creak, but with the smooth, silent glide of expensive hinges. Miles Crow stepped into the room. If my family was expecting a jovial sales representative ready to slap backs and open champagne, they were immediately disappointed. Miles did not look like a partner. He looked like a verdict wearing a 3-piece suit. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other. Moving with a terrifying economy of motion, he walked straight past me without a glance, treating me with the exact same level of acknowledgement he gave the coat rack. It was perfect. By ignoring me, he validated my family's worldview that I was irrelevant, which was the most dangerous mistake they could make. Graham was out of his chair before Miles had even reached the table. My father extended his hand, his smile stretching so wide it looked painful. "Mr. Crow, welcome to Hawthorne Crest," Graham boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the large, acoustically treated room. "We are honored to have Waverly represented here today." Trent was vibrating with an energy that bordered on mania. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, laughing too loudly at nothing in particular. "Great to meet you. Miles, I have heard great things, big things. I am ready to get this show on the road." Miles shook Graham's hand briefly, a firm professional grip that offered no warmth, and nodded at Trent. He did not smile. He pulled out a chair and sat down, placing his tablet on the mahogany table with a deliberate click. "Mr. Lawson, Mr. Trent Lawson," Miles said. His voice was a low baritone, crisp and completely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man who read regulations for leisure. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries. My schedule is tight, and we have significant compliance hurdles to clear before any signing can take place." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trent's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he plastered it back on. "Of course," Trent said, sitting down. "Compliance? Absolutely. We run a tight ship here." Miles tapped the screen of his tablet, his eyes not leaving the device. New federal regulations regarding capital buy-ins for investment partnerships have tightened significantly in the last quarter, specifically regarding anti-money laundering protocols and source of fund verification. Before we proceed to the partnership agreement, I require immediate proof of liquidity. He looked up then, locking eyes with Trent. $175,000. Liquid, unencumbered, available for immediate transfer. The air in the room grew heavy. This was not the celebratory rubber-stamping session they had envisioned. This was an interrogation. Marianne sensed the tension. Her instinct, honed over 40 years of social climbing, was to deflect discomfort by exerting control over something small. That something was me. She snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, like a dry twig breaking. "Adeline," she called out, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet venom. "Mr. Crow's glass is empty. Do not just stand there staring into space." She turned to Miles, offering him an apologetic smile. "You must forgive my daughter. She is a bit slow on the uptake. Adeline, pour the water, and for heaven's sake, do not spill it like you did at the Christmas party." I had not spilled anything at the Christmas party. Trent had knocked a glass of red wine out of my hand while demonstrating a golf swing in the living room, and Marianne had blamed me for ruining the rug. But I did not correct her. I simply nodded. "Yes, Mother," I said softly. I walked over to the table with the pitcher. I moved with practiced fluidity, pouring the water into Miles's glass without a single drop missing the mark. My proximity to the table meant I was standing right behind Trent's left shoulder. I was invisible to them, a piece of background noise, which meant they did not lower their voices. As the water filled the glass, I heard Trent lean in and whisper to our father. "It is fine, Dad," Trent hissed under his breath. "I have the papers prepared. It looks totally legit." "Just give it to him," Graham whispered back, his voice tight. "Stop stalling." I finished pouring and stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the room, but my ears were tuned to their frequency. Trent cleared his throat and reached into his leather portfolio. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He opened it with a flourish and slid a heavy, stapled document across the table toward Miles. It was a bank statement, printed on high-quality linen stock, utilizing full color. It looked impressive. It looked official. It showed a balance of $200,000 sitting comfortably in a checking account. "Here you go," Trent said, his confidence returning. "Proof of liquidity, as requested, generated this morning. You will find everything in order. The funds are ready to move the second we sign." Miles looked at the document. He did not pick it up. He did not even read the numbers. He simply stared at the paper as if Trent had placed a dead fish on the table. "Mr. Lawson," Miles said, his tone dropping an octave, "I am afraid there is a misunderstanding. This is a printout." Trent blinked. "It is a statement. From the bank." "It is a static document," Miles corrected him. "In the age of Photoshop and digital alteration, Waverly and Company no longer accepts physical printouts or forwarded screenshots as proof of capital for partner-level buy-ins. This piece of paper tells me nothing other than that you own a high-end laser printer." Trent froze. His hand hovered over the document, uncertain whether to pull it back or push it forward. Graham shifted in his seat, his face turning a darker shade of red. "Now see here," Graham sputtered, his bluster rising to cover his fear. "That is an official document from our financial institution. Are you accusing my son of forgery? This is absurd. What kind of bureaucratic nonsense is this? We are offering you a check, and you're complaining about the paper it is printed on? It is not bureaucracy. Mr. Lawson, it is security," Miles said, unmoved. "We require a digital original, a direct export from the banking portal, time-stamped within the last hour, verifying the live balance." Trent looked sick. He knew, and I knew, that the live balance in his actual account was probably less than 4 figures. The document on the table was a fabrication, a collage of numbers he had pasted together to buy himself legitimacy. The silence stretched out, agonizing and thick. Trent opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at Graham for help. Graham looked at Miles, trying to intimidate him. But Miles was a wall of stone. This was the moment. They were cornered, but they were not yet captured. They needed a nudge. They needed a helpful suggestion to push them from mere embarrassment into verifiable fraud. I took a small step forward, clasping my hands in front of me. I adopted the posture of the helpful, slightly dim-witted assistant trying to smooth things over. "Excuse me," I said, my voice soft and hesitant. Everyone turned to look at me. Marianne looked ready to throw her own glass at my head. "What is it, Adeline?" she snapped. "We are in the middle of a negotiation." "I am sorry," I said, looking at the floor and then up at Trent. "I just use the online banking system for my rent sometimes. I think the gentleman means the PDF download, the one you get directly from the website. The system probably needs the metadata to verify it is real. If you just log in and download the current file, you could email it to him right now. It would only take a second." I looked at Miles. "Playing my part. Is that right, sir? A direct PDF?" Miles looked at me, his eyes betraying nothing, though I knew he was suppressing a smirk. "That is correct. A direct PDF export sent to our compliance server. That would satisfy the requirement immediately." I turned back to Trent with a helpful smile. "See, Trent? It is easy. You have your laptop right there. Just log in and send the file. Then Father does not have to worry." It was the perfect trap. I had offered him a solution that sounded like salvation, but was actually a guillotine. If he logged in and sent the real file, he would be exposed as broke. If he refused, the deal died instantly. That left him with only one option, the option his desperate, arrogant mind would inevitably choose. He would have to alter the file digitally, right here, right now, and send it through the wire. And once he did that, once he sent a falsified instrument across state lines via the internet to secure a financial position, he wasn't just a liar, he was a felon. Trent looked at his laptop. Then he looked at Graham. I saw the calculation happen behind his eyes. He thought he was smart enough to pull it off. He thought he could edit the PDF before attaching it. "Right," Trent said, his voice shaking slightly. "Right. Good idea. Adeline, the digital file. Of course. Let me just pull that up." He opened his laptop. The trap was set. "Here," I said, sliding a small notepad across the polished mahogany table toward my brother. "I wrote down the direct compliance address for you. It is safer than sending it to a general inbox." On the paper, in my neat, nondescript handwriting, I had written compliance-verification Waverly-partners-secure.com. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard corporate email domain. It had all the right buzzwords: verification, partners, secure. In reality, that domain was hosted on a private server sitting in a climate-controlled rack in Northern Virginia, a server that I paid for and that only I could access. Any email sent to that address did not go to a bank or a board of directors. It went directly to a secure folder on my phone, where it would be automatically stripped of its headers and analyzed for metadata anomalies. Trent stared at the piece of paper as if it were a bomb defusal manual. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. Miles Crow checked his watch. He did it slowly, deliberately, making sure the movement caught the light. "Mr. Lawson," Miles said, addressing Trent with a tone of bored impatience. "I need that file on my screen before the encryption key resets. The clearing window for new partner onboarding closes in exactly 10 minutes. If we miss that window, the system locks out until next quarter. And I should mention, there is a gentleman from a venture capital firm in Chicago waiting in the lobby. He has his liquidity proof ready. If your slot time's out, it goes to him." It was a lie, of course. There was no one in the lobby except the security guard and a potted fern. But Miles knew exactly how to trigger Trent's insecurity. My brother had spent his entire life terrified that someone else was going to eat his lunch. 10 minutes is plenty," Trent stammered, his fingers hovering over his laptop keyboard. "No problem. Just technical difficulties with the Wi-Fi. You know how it is." "The Wi-Fi is functioning perfectly. Trent, Graham interjected, his voice tight with anxiety. Just send the man the document. I watched Trent. I knew exactly what was happening on his screen because I knew exactly how he operated. He could not log into his real bank account because the balance likely read somewhere in the low hundreds, not the $200,000 he claimed to have. He could not send the file he had printed earlier because Miles had already rejected it as a static image. He was trapped. He had to create a new reality. Trent began to type. It was not the rhythmic, confident typing of someone composing an email. It was the erratic, staccato clicking of someone navigating file menus and editing text boxes. He was opening an old PDF, probably a legitimate statement from years ago or a template he had downloaded, and he was altering the numbers. His eyes darted from the screen to Miles, then to Graham, then back to the screen. He was sweating profusely now. A bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. He was frantically trying to match fonts, trying to align the decimal points, trying to make the lie look like the truth. 5 minutes, Miles announced. He did not look up from his tablet. Almost there, Trent said, his voice cracking. Just the system is slow exporting. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded behind my back. I was witnessing a felony in real time, wire fraud, forgery, attempted grand larceny, and he was doing it with the desperate clumsiness of a child trying to fix a broken vase with glue before Mommy comes home. Done, Trent exclaimed suddenly, hitting the enter key with too much force. Sent. It should be in your inbox now. He slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath that smelled of stale coffee and fear. He looked at Graham and grinned, a look of pure relief. See? Told you I had it under control. A second later, a subtle vibration buzzed against my hip. I slipped my phone out of my pocket, keeping it low, shielded by the edge of the credenza. I opened the notification. There was the email, and attached to it was a file named statement_final_october.pdf. I almost laughed out loud. Final. Banks do not name their auto-generated statements final. They name them with long strings of account numbers and dates. Final is a word used by graphic designers. Final is a word used by college students turning in a term paper. Final implies that there was a draft 1 and a draft 2. I tapped the file to open the properties inspector. The analysis software ran instantly. The results were damning. Creation date, 2 years ago. Modification date, 1 minute ago. Software, Adobe Acrobat Pro Editor. Tags, edited. Layer comps. He hadn't even scrubbed the metadata. He had just painted over the numbers and hit save. It was not just a fake. It was an insult to the art of forgery. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I caught Miles's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The trap had snapped shut. We had the evidence. Now, we needed a pound of flesh. Miles tapped his tablet, pretending to refresh his inbox. I have received the file, he said neutrally. The system is processing the verification now. It will take a moment to clear. Trent beamed. Perfect. So, where do I sign? Not yet, Miles said. He set the tablet down and reached into his briefcase. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from administrative to predatory. There is one final procedural hurdle. Because the liquidity proof came in so close to the deadline, the risk algorithm has flagged this transaction for a 24-hour holding period. Holding period? Graham asked. Sitting up straighter. What does that mean? It means, Miles said, sliding a thick document across the table, that while the cash clears, Waverly requires temporary collateral to lock in the partnership rate. It is a standard bridge security measure. Just to ensure no funds are retracted during the clearing phase, he rested his hand on the document. The title page was visible in bold. Black letters. Deed of trust. We require a lien on a tangible asset of equal or greater value to the buy-in amount, Miles explained smoothly. We ran a title search on the family holdings. The property at 118 Briarstone Drive appears to be free of major encumbrances. We have prepared a deed of trust against that property. It is purely a formality. Once the cash wire is fully confirmed tomorrow, the lien dissolves automatically. The room went silent. 118 Briarstone Drive was not just a house. It was my parents' retirement plan. It was the paid-off sanctuary they intended to move to once they sold the big house. It was the only thing they actually owned outright. Graham stared at the document. His hands were shaking. "You want me to put up the house? For a day?" "It is standard procedure for late-stage buy-ins." Miles lied without blinking. "If you are uncomfortable, we can release the spot to the next candidate, but the partnership offer expires when I leave this room." Graham looked at Trent. Fear was etched into the deep lines of my father's face. He was a gambler, yes, but he was a gambler who liked to play with other people's money. This was his safety net. "Trent?" Graham asked, his voice wavering. "Is this necessary?" Trent did not hesitate. He did not look at the father who had bailed him out a dozen times. He looked at the prize. He saw the partner title, the imaginary corner office, the validation he craved like a drug. "Dad, it is 24 hours, Trent said, leaning forward, his eyes intense and predatory. "It is a technicality. The cash is there. You saw me send the statement. There is zero risk. Zero." Graham hesitated, his hand hovering over the pen. "But if something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Trent snapped, then lowered his voice to a seductive purr. "Think about the upside. Dad, once I am a partner, we are talking about 7-figure distributions. We are talking about that retirement life you wanted, not just the Briarstone house. I'm talking about a place on the Gulf, private golf course access, a boat. The reputation of this family has been restored to where it belongs." He was painting a masterpiece of delusion. He knew exactly where Graham was weak. He knew Graham cared more about how he looked to the neighbors than he cared about financial reality. "You want to be the father of a partner at Waverly," Trent pressed. "Or do you want to be the guy who got scared at the finish line?" Marianne chimed in, her eyes gleaming with greed. "Graham, do not be a coward. Trent has worked so hard for this. Do not ruin his moment over some paperwork." I stood in the corner, silent as a grave. I watched my brother sell our father down the river for a title that didn't exist. At a company I owned, using money he didn't have. It was Shakespearean in its tragedy. But I wasn't there to applaud. I was there to collect. Graham looked at Trent one last time. "You are sure the money is real? Son, are you sure it clears tomorrow?" "I swear on my life," Trent said. Graham picked up the pen. The ink in the Mont Blanc pen seemed to hesitate, suspended just millimeters above the signature line. Graham's hand was trembling. It was a subtle tremor, the kind born of age and the terrifying realization that he was placing his last remaining safety net on a roulette table. He looked up from the document, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He looked at Trent, whose face was a mask of desperate encouragement. Then, for the first time in an hour, his gaze drifted to the corner where I stood. He looked at me as if he had suddenly remembered I was a biological entity and not just a fixture of the room. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a momentary flash where he almost asked for my opinion. He knew I was the one who balanced his checkbooks. He knew I was the one who understood risk. For a second, the father who raised me almost surfaced, pleading for the daughter who actually loved him to stop him. But then the addiction took over. The need to be the patriarch, the builder of dynasties, crushed that moment of clarity. He stiffened his spine, rejecting the caution I represented. "You have to break eggs to make an omelet," Graham muttered, his voice gaining a false, blustery strength. He was not talking to us. He was talking to his own conscience. Men build empires on risk. The Rockefellers did not get rich by hiding their money under a mattress. They leveraged. They acted. Marianne saw his hesitation and immediately moved to cut off any retreat. She turned her head, looking at me with a sneer that was meant to bond her to the men in the room. "Do not look at her, Graham," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "What does Adeline know about high finance? Look at her. She is wearing a suit from 3 seasons ago. She only knows how to save pennies. She has no concept of wealth creation. She is content to be small. We are not small people. Graham. It was a perfect encapsulation of their worldview. To them, solvency was a lack of imagination. Paying bills on time was a character flaw. Trent leaned in, delivering the final, fatal blow to our father's resistance. He lowered his voice, making it intimate, heavy with emotional blackmail. "Dad," Trent said, "Mr. Crow is waiting. The investors are waiting. If you do not sign this, you are not just saying no to a deal. You are telling me, right here in front of everyone, that you do not believe in me. You are shattering my future because you are scared. Is that who you are? Are you the man who built Hawthorne Crest? Or are you just an old man afraid of a signature?" That did it. The accusation of cowardice was the one thing Graham could not withstand. "I am afraid of nothing," Graham snapped. He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of the nib moving across the page was deafening in the silent room. He signed his name with a flourish, a large, looping autograph that tried to compensate for the fact that he was signing away his life. "Done," Graham declared, tossing the pen onto the table. "There is your collateral." Miles Crow did not smile. He did not congratulate them. He simply reached out, took the document, and verified the signature. Then, he took a heavy brass stamp from his briefcase. Thud. He stamped the document. Lien recorded. To my family. That sound meant the deal was done. To me, it sounded like the heavy steel door of a prison cell slamming shut. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was legal. It was binding. And it was mine. "Excellent," Miles said, sliding the deed into a secure folder. "The line is active. The position is secured pending the wire clearance." The tension in the room snapped, replaced instantly by a wave of unearned euphoria. Trent let out a whoop of joy. Clapping his hands together, Graham slumped back in his chair, wiping sweat from his forehead, a grin spreading across his face as the dopamine hit of the gamble washed over him. "I told you!" Trent shouted, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "I told you it was just paperwork. We are in... Dad, we are partners." He turned to me, his arrogance expanding to fill the room. He felt untouchable now. He thought he had navigated the storm and came out as a captain. "You can relax now, Adeline," Trent jeered, pointing a finger at me. "God, you looked so grim in the corner. You really need to lighten up. Hey, when the distribution checks start rolling in next quarter, maybe I will expand the office support staff. I could hire you as a receptionist. You are already good at pouring water, right? We could probably match your current salary." He laughed. It was a cruel, braying sound. Marianne joined in, her laughter tinkling like broken glass. "Oh, stop it. Trent, she lacks the personality for the front desk. Maybe she can handle the filing in the back." They laughed together. A family united in their triumph, bonding over the belittling of the one person who had never asked them for a dime. The room filled with the cheap, tinny sound of people who thought they had won a game they did not even know they were playing. I looked at them. I really looked at them. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical resolve. They were no longer my parents or my brother. They were liabilities, and I was the auditor. I set the water pitcher down on the credenza. The crystal made a solid, decisive click against the wood. I stepped away from the corner. I did not walk toward the door. I walked toward the head of the table. I moved slowly, deliberately, my heels striking the carpet with a rhythm that demanded attention. I was not walking like a servant anymore. I was walking like the owner of the building. Trent's laughter faltered. He noticed the change in my posture. He noticed that I wasn't shrinking away. "Adeline?" Graham asked, his brow furrowing. "Where are you going?" "Sit down." I ignored him. I walked past Marianne, past Trent, and stood directly behind the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the chair reserved for the managing partner. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I also pulled out a high-speed HDMI cable that I had concealed in my blazer pocket, without saying a word. I plugged the cable into the port on the mahogany conference table. linking my device to the massive 80-inch monitor mounted on the wall behind me. "Adeline, what are you doing?" Marianne snapped, her voice rising. "Stop playing with the equipment." I did not look at her. I tapped my screen. The giant monitor flared to life. It displayed the Juniper Vale Holdings logo, a stark, modern design of a stylized tree with deep roots. I looked up, meeting Trent's confused gaze with eyes that were absolute zero. "The time for service is over," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and projected with the authority of a courtroom judge. Now, we move to the portion of the meeting I like to call displaying the truth. Trent looked at Miles, expecting him to intervene, expecting the powerful representative from Waverly to order the crazy sister to leave. "Mr. Crow," Trent said, "tell her to stop." Miles Crow did not look at Trent. He turned his chair, facing me. He folded his hands in his lap and lowered his head in a gesture of absolute deference. "The floor is yours, Ms. Lawson," Miles said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. My family froze. They looked from Miles to me, their brains struggling to compute the impossible shift in hierarchy they had just witnessed. The man they feared was bowing to the furniture. I placed my hands on the table and leaned forward. "Let's begin." The light from the 80-inch monitor bathed the boardroom in a harsh, clinical blue glow. It was the color of a hospital operating room, or perhaps a morgue. My family blinked against the sudden brightness, their eyes adjusting from the warm, dim lighting of their delusions to the cold, hard pixels of reality. "What is this?" Trent demanded, pointing at the screen. "Why is your company logo on the screen? Juniper Vale? Who is Juniper Vale?" I tapped a key on my laptop. The first document appeared. It was a complex organizational chart, a web of corporate entities connected by solid black lines. At the bottom was Waverly and Company Capital. Above it, connected by a thick line labeled Primary Debt Holder and Governance Control, was Juniper Vale Holdings. Juniper Vale Holdings is a private equity vehicle specializing in the acquisition of distressed assets, I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence. 48 hours ago, Juniper Vale purchased the controlling tranche of debt for Waverly and Company. This purchase agreement grants the holder, me, unilateral rights to veto new partners, restructure management, and oversee all compliance operations. I turned to face them. Graham's mouth was slightly open, a look of incomprehension on his face. He was trying to reconcile the daughter he ignored with the entity that now owned his creditor. "You?" Graham whispered. "You bought the debt? With what money?" "With the money I made while you were busy telling everyone I was a disappointment," I replied evenly. I gestured to the man sitting at the table. "And that brings us to Mr. Crow." Trent looked at Miles, desperation creeping into his voice. "Miles, tell her to stop this. You are the auditor. You represent Waverly." I answered him. Miles Crow does not work for Waverly. He never has. He is a forensic accountant and the head of security for Juniper Vale Holdings. I paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. He does not answer to the Waverly board. He answers me. He is here because I sent him. The color drained from Trent's face so fast, it looked like a physical injury. He looked at Miles, then at me. The realization hitting him like a physical blow, the man he had been trying to impress, the man he had lied to, was an employee of the sister he had mocked minutes ago. "This is a joke," Trent stammered. "This is some sick joke." "I do not joke about solvency," I said. "Next slide." I tapped the key again. The screen changed. This time, it displayed a live feed from a banking API. It was a raw data stream, stripping away the pretty user interface of a banking website and showing the naked numbers underneath. "When you engaged with the compliance verification system I provided," I said, looking at Trent, "you did not just send a file. You authorized a one-time, read-only handshake with the source account to verify the origin of the transfer. This is the actual balance of the account you access to generate your PDF. On the screen, the number was huge and unforgiving. It was not $200,000. It was $342.16. The room was silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. $300. That was the sum total of Trent's empire. "That is wrong," Trent blurted out, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "That is the wrong account. I have multiple accounts. That is just my operating expense account. The capital is in a trust. I grabbed the wrong file." I did not argue. I did not debate him. I simply pressed the next key. "Document 3, I announced. The screen shifted to a forensic analysis of the PDF file Trent had emailed 5 minutes ago. It was a visual autopsy of his fraud. The software broke the document down into layers, highlighting the discrepancies in bright red. "This is the metadata from the file titled Statement Final October," I narrated, pointing to the data points as they appeared. "First, observe the creation timestamp. The original document was created 14 months ago. Second, observe the modification timestamp. It was modified 8 minutes ago using Adobe Acrobat Pro. Third, look at the font analysis." I zoomed in on the balance section of the document on the screen. "The bank uses Helvetica Neue for its statements," I explained, my tone clinical. "The numbers inserted here are in Arial. It is a common mistake for amateurs. And finally, if we strip away the top layer of the image, we can see the original text underneath." I hit a button. The overlay vanished, revealing the original balance from the year prior, $12.50. "You did not grab the wrong file, Trent," I said. "You manufactured a false instrument." I stepped away from the screen and looked him in the eye. "Sending falsified financial documents across state lines via the internet to secure a loan, a partnership, or a credit extension is not a mistake. It is wire fraud. It is a federal crime, and the penalties are severe." Graham made a sound like a wounded animal. He slumped forward, his elbows hitting the table, his head falling into his hands. He realized it then. The house. The line. He had just pledged his only asset to secure a deal based on a lie that I had just dissected in 4K resolution. "You knew," Graham groaned into his hands. "You knew he didn't have the money." "I suspected," I corrected him. "But suspicion is not proof. I needed him to prove it, and he did." I walked over to the table where Miles sat. "The beauty of this system, Trent, is that I did not frame you. I did not plant evidence. I did not forge a signature. I simply gave you a choice. You could have told the truth. You could have said you didn't have the funds. You could have walked away. But your ego wouldn't let you." I pointed to the server log on the screen, showing the exact second the email was received. "You clicked send," I said softly. "You created the document. You uploaded it. You certified it. You handed me the murder weapon with your fingerprints all over it, and you did it while bragging about how smart you are." Marianne stood up, her face twisted in a mask of fury I had never seen before. She didn't look at Trent's fraud. She didn't look at the lie. She only saw the exposure. "You traitor!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She pointed a manicured finger at me, shaking with rage. "How could you? He is your brother. You set him up. You stood there and poured water and watched him walk into a trap. You are sick. You are a traitor to this family." The word hung in the air. Traitor. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years telling me to shrink, to be quiet, to serve the men in the house because they were the ones who mattered. I looked at the mother who had watched me pay for my own college while she bought Trent a new car. "A traitor?" I asked. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. "You are confused about the definition. Mother." I walked closer to her, invading her personal space for the first time in my life. She flinched, stepping back. "Betrayal implies that I owe you allegiance," I said. "It implies that I am yours to command. But I am not. I do not belong to you. I do not belong to this family. I belong to no one." I turned back to the room, sweeping my gaze over the wreckage of their pride. "I am not a traitor," I said. "I am a creditor, and I have come to collect." I stood at the head of the table, the glow of the monitor casting long, distorted shadows against the boardroom walls. The silence was absolute, a vacuum where the air used to be. My family looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just broken into their home, not realizing that I was the only one who had been paying the rent on their reality for years. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out two distinct folders. One was red, one was blue. I placed them on the mahogany table with deliberate precision, spacing them exactly 6 inches apart. "We have arrived at a crossroads," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the trembling that used to plague me when I spoke to my father. "And unlike the choices you have made for the last 30 years, this one is binary. There are no gray areas. There are no bridge loans. There are only 2 doors. I rested my hand on the red folder. "Option A," I began. "I walk out of this room and get into the car with Miles. He uploads the compliance log, the forged PDF, the metadata analysis, and the recording of this meeting to the district attorney's office and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Given the amount of money involved and the use of interstate wire communication, Trent will be facing charges for wire fraud and attempted grand larceny." Trent flinched, his face pale and waxy. "The federal sentencing guidelines for this are not kind," I continued, looking directly at my brother. "You are looking at a minimum of 5 years, potentially up to 20 depending on the judge's mood. While that happens, Juniper Vale will exercise its rights under the lien we just recorded. We will initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings on the Briarstone property to recover costs. It will be public. It will be messy. Every friend, every business rival, and every country club member you know will read about it in the morning paper." Graham made a choking sound. The public humiliation terrified him far more than his son going to prison. I moved my hand to the blue folder. "Option B," I said, lowering my voice. "We keep this civil. We treat this as a private family matter." Hope flickered in Marianne's eyes. She sat up straighter, thinking she had found an opening to manipulate me. However, I cut her off before she could speak. "Civil does not mean free. In option B, you sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You voluntarily transfer the title of the Briarstone house to Juniper Vale Holdings immediately to satisfy the debt and the breach of contract. In exchange, I agree to seal the compliance logs. I agree not to forward the evidence to the authorities. No police, no press, no prison." "You cannot do that," Graham whispered. He looked small, shrunken in his expensive suit. "That house is everything. It is our future. You cannot just take it. I am your father." "You cannot do this to me," he repeated, his voice rising to a shout. "I cannot do this to you?" I asked, tilting my head. "Graham, you have done this to me for 30 years. You treated me like an appliance. You extracted my labor and discarded my worth. You watched me struggle while you poured gold down the drain for him. Do not talk to me about what I can and cannot do. I am simply balancing the ledger." Trent suddenly unraveled. The arrogance that had defined him 10 minutes ago evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. "Adeline, please," he begged, his hands shaking as he reached across the table. "You can't send me to jail. I wouldn't survive. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I teased you. I'm sorry I was a jerk. Just delete the file. Please, we're siblings." When I didn't blink, his panic morphed instantly into blame. He spun around to face our parents. "This is your fault," he screamed at Graham. "You pushed me. You told me I had to close the deal. You told me to do whatever it took. I didn't want to fake the document. You made me feel like I had no choice." "How dare you?" Marianne gasped. "And you?" Trent pointed a shaking finger at our mother. "You always told me I was too special to fail. You never let me learn anything. You crippled me." Then, seeing that his parents were paralyzed, he turned back to me, his face twisting into a snarl. The begging was gone. replaced by the ugly, cornered aggression of a narcissist. "If you ruin me, I will kill you," he hissed. "I will tell everyone you hacked me. I will sue you for entrapment. I will make sure you never work in this town again." "I own the town, Trent," I said calmly, "and threatening a federal witness is another felony. Would you like to add that to the red folder?" Trent shut his mouth, his chest heaving. Marianne stood up, tears streaming down her face. She played the only card she had left, the one she always used to silence me. "Adeline, listen to yourself," she wept. "We are family. Family is blood. How can you be so cold? We share the same DNA. You cannot destroy your own flesh and blood over money." "Blood?" I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Where was the blood when I was working 3 jobs in college because Dad said he didn't have the cash for my tuition, right after he bought Trent a sailboat? Where was the blood when I was living in a studio apartment with no heat? And you didn't call me for 6 months? Where was the blood when you told everyone at Cousin Sarah's wedding that I was a secretary because you were ashamed of my actual job title? I slammed my hand down on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "The blood is on the floor," I said, "and I am done bleeding for you." I opened the blue folder. Inside was a legal agreement, drafted by my attorneys, ready for signature. "There is one more condition," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Option B requires a structural change. If you sign this, Trent is finished. He resigned from Hawthorne Crest effective immediately. He is removed from all board positions. He loses all access to company emails, bank accounts, and legal records. He is to have 0 involvement in any financial decisions regarding the family estate moving forward." "You want me to fire my own son?" Graham asked, his voice trembling. "I want you to amputate the gangrenous limb before it kills the rest of the body," I corrected him. "Trent is a liability. He has proven today that he will commit crimes to protect his ego. If you keep him, he will eventually drag you into a cell next to him. I am offering you a chance to save your reputation. Graham, if you sign, the world never knows. You get to keep your dignity. You just lose the assets you were going to lose anyway." Graham looked at the document. He looked at the red folder, bulging with the evidence of his son's crimes. He realized the trap was perfect. If he refused, he lost the house to foreclosure and his name was destroyed. If he signed, he lost the house to me. But he kept his freedom. He looked at Trent. Trent was staring at the table, unable to meet his father's eyes. For the first time, Graham didn't see a golden boy. He saw a man-child who had almost destroyed them all. He saw the abyss. Graham started, then stopped. He looked at Marianne. She gave a microscopic nod. She was a survivor. She would sacrifice Trent to save her social standing. "Give me the pen," Graham whispered. I slid the heavy fountain pen across the table. It spun on the polished wood, coming to a rest right in front of him. The air in the room was frozen. No one breathed. The only sound was the hum of the hard drive on the table, recording every second of their surrender. Graham picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently that for a moment, I didn't think he could make contact with the paper. He looked at me one last time, searching for a trace of the daughter who used to fetch his slippers. She wasn't there. He lowered the pen to the paper. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room, loud and violent in the silence. Graham signed his name. It was not the bold, sweeping signature he usually used on checks he couldn't cash. It was cramped, small, the signature of a defeated man. He pushed the document away from him as if it were burning his fingers. Marianne was next. She snatched the pen from the table, her face wet with angry tears. She didn't look at me. She muttered something under her breath about ungrateful children and the cruelty of the world. But she signed. She signed because she loved her social standing more than she hated my success. She knew that losing the house to a foreclosure auction would be a public death, whereas signing it over to a private holding company kept the secret in the family. Then the document slid to Trent. My brother looked at the paper. He looked at the clauses that stripped him of his title, his access, and his future inheritance. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dull, gray shock. He still didn't quite understand the magnitude of what had just happened. He picked up the pen and signed with a limp, mechanical motion. He was signing his own professional death warrant, and he didn't even have the energy to read the fine print. Miles Crow stepped forward. Efficient as a machine, he took the documents, checked the signatures, applied a notary seal, and placed them into his locked briefcase. "The transfer is executed," Miles said. "The line is satisfied." I reached out and took the folder from Miles. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't just paper, it was freedom. "It is done," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air. "From this moment forward, the property at 118 Briarstone Drive has a new owner. The deed is recorded in the name of Juniper Vale Holdings." I looked at my parents, who were huddled together in their chairs, looking old and diminished. "And the owner," I continued, "is the person you made stand in the corner to pour the water." The reality of it finally pierced through Trent's shock. His face flushed a deep, ugly red. He slammed his fist onto the table. "You set me up!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You planned this whole thing. You knew I was going for the partnership. You waited for this. You baited me into sending that file. This is a setup." I looked at him calmly. I didn't flinch. "No, Trent," I said. "I didn't set you up. I didn't force you to lie. I didn't force you to spend money you didn't have. I didn't force you to forge a bank statement. You did all of that yourself. I just stopped being your victim and started being your auditor." "You stole our house," Marianne shrieked, finding her voice. "You stole your father's retirement. You are a thief." "Am I?" I asked. I opened the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper that I had been saving for this exact moment. "Let us talk about theft, Mother," I said. "Let us talk about negligence. Did you really think that the Briarstone property was free and clear before today? Did you think the county just forgot to send the tax bills for the last 3 years?" Graham looked up, confused. "What are you talking about? I handle the bills." "You handle nothing," I said coldly. "You haven't paid the property taxes on Briarstone in 36 months. The county was 2 weeks away from putting a tax lien on it and auctioning it off for pennies on the dollar. You were so busy funneling cash into Trent's failed startups that you stopped paying the government." I slid the paper across the table. It was a receipt. "Who do you think paid them?" I asked. 2 years ago, a shell company called Azure Sky Management stepped in and paid the back taxes. Last year, they did it again. They also paid for the roof repair you ignored, and the insurance premium you let lapse." Marianne picked up the paper, her hands trembling. She read the numbers, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, paid quietly, without fanfare, while they were busy mocking me. "Azure Sky Management," I said, "is a subsidiary of Juniper Vale. Is it me?" The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just shock. It was shame. Deep, humiliating shame. "I have been paying for the roof over your head for years," I said, my voice hard. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because I knew this day would come. I was protecting the asset. You treated me like a burden, like a maintenance cost. But the truth is, I was the only structural support this family had left. If I hadn't stepped in, you would have been homeless 2 years ago." Marianne looked at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The narrative she had built her life around, that Trent was the savior and I was the extra weight, had just collapsed. The daughter she despised was the only reason she still had a living room to sit in. Graham looked at the receipt, then at me. His eyes were wet. "Adeline," he choked out. I didn't know. We can fix this. Give us a chance. We can be a family again. Just tear up the agreement. Let's start over." "We are starting over," I said. "But on my terms." I tapped the table with my index finger. "You can stay in the house," I said. "I am not going to evict my parents, providing they follow the rules, but you are no longer owners. You are tenants. You will sign a standard residential lease agreement. You will pay rent. It will be fair market value. And most importantly, you will respect the landlord. Graham flinched at the word landlord. If you miss a payment, I continued, you are out. If you try to leverage the property for another loan, you are out. If you disrespect me in my own house, you are out. I turned to Miles. Miles, wait for me in the car, I instructed. Give me 5 minutes. Miles nodded, picked up his briefcase containing the signed surrender of their empire, and walked out the door. The click of the door closing signaled the end of their protection. Why did you send him away? Trent sneered. Sensing a moment of physical vulnerability, he stood up, leaning over the table, trying to use his size to intimidate me. Think you're tough now? Addie? Without your bodyguard? You think you can just talk to Dad like that? I looked at my brother. He was pathetic. He was trying to drag me into a screaming match, trying to provoke an emotional reaction so he could feel superior. He wanted me to yell, to cry, to break. I didn't move. I didn't step back. Miles is not my bodyguard, I said softly. He is my witness, and he has a very specific instruction. If I do not walk out of those doors in 5 minutes and enter my passcode into my phone, the system automatically releases the red folder to the district attorney. The email is drafted. The attachments are loaded. The countdown is running. Trent froze. So go ahead, I said, gesturing vaguely. Yell, scream, throw a chair, try to hit me. Every second you waste on a tantrum is a second closer to you going to federal prison. The only thing keeping you free right now is my safety. Trent stood there, his fists clenched, his face purple with impotent rage. He wanted to destroy me, but I had removed his ability to even touch me without destroying himself. I picked up my bag. I smoothed my jacket. I am leaving now, I said. I expect the signed lease agreement on my desk by Monday morning. Do not be late. I turned my back on them. It was the most dangerous thing you could do in a room full of predators. But they weren't predators anymore. They were declawed. Adeline! Trent shouted after me, his voice cracking. You are cold. You are heartless. You planned this. Admit it. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. I just let the silence stretch out, letting his words bounce off the walls and fall flat. I walked out, behind me, in the sudden quiet of the boardroom. I heard a sound that was sweeter than any apology. You idiot, Graham hissed. I paused, just for a second. You ruined us, Marianne whispered. We had everything, and you ruined us. I smiled. For the first time in his life, Trent was looking at his parents, waiting for them to save him, waiting for them to tell him it wasn't his fault. But they weren't looking at him with love. They weren't looking at him like a growth stock. They were looking at him like a bad debt that had finally come due. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind Miles Crow should have been the end of it. It should have been the moment the silence settled and the reality of their new status as tenants sank in. But panic is a noisy creature, and my parents are currently drowning in it. They looked at the closed door, then at the signed deed, and then, inevitably, they looked at the cause of their ruin for 30 years. Trent could do no wrong. If he failed a test, it was the teacher's fault. If he crashed a car, it was the road's fault. But now, with the deed to their home resting in my briefcase and their social standing hanging by a thread, the immunity he had enjoyed his entire life evaporated instantly. You told me the money was real, Graham said. His voice was not loud. It was trembling with a mix of fear and fury. He turned on his son with a look I had only ever seen directed at me. You looked me in the eye and swore on your life that the funds were liquid. You said it was a technicality. I thought I could move things around, Trent stammered, backing away from the table. I was going to fix it once the bonus came in. You lied, Marianne screamed. She did not look like the composed matriarch of Hawthorne Crest anymore. She looked like a desperate woman who had just realized she was standing on a trapdoor. She pointed a shaking finger at Trent. You forced your father to sign that lien. You bullied him. You said you would be destroyed if we did not help you." "I didn't force him," Trent shouted back, his face twisting. "He signed it because he's greedy. He wanted the boat. He wanted the prestige." "Do not speak to your father that way," Marianne shrieked. She turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Adeline, you heard him. You saw it. He coerced us. He manipulated Graham. We are victims here too. Surely you cannot hold us responsible for his lies. We didn't know." I watched them turn on each other. It was fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. The family unit, which they had always claimed was sacred and unbreakable, was shredding itself to pieces the moment the money ran out. They were throwing Trent to the wolves to save their own skins, completely forgetting that I was the wolf. Miles had paused at the door. Sensing the escalation, I raised a hand, signaling him to wait. The show wasn't quite over. Trent saw his support system collapse, and he panicked. He realized he had no allies left in the room. He turned his aggression toward me, the only target left. "This is illegal!" Trent yelled, slamming his hands onto the conference table. "I am going to sue you. I am going to sue everyone. This is entrapment. You lured me here under false pretenses. You set up a fake compliance check to trick me into incriminating myself. No judge will uphold this. I will tell the court you hacked my system." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I walked back to the laptop that was still connected to the main screen. "Entrapment," I said calmly, "requires me to coerce you into committing a crime you would not otherwise have committed. I did no such thing. I simply provided a portal." I tapped a key. The screen shifted to display the system log from the compliance server. It was a detailed, second-by-second timeline of Trent's actions. "Look at the screen." "Trent," I said. The log entries appeared in large, clear text. "User action. Upload file. System warning. Document must be an original bank export. Altered documents are a violation of federal law. Proceed. User action. Clicked confirm. System warning. Final verification. Do you certify under penalty of perjury that this data is accurate? User action. Clicked I agree. User action. Clicked submit." "The system warned you twice," I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. "It gave you two distinct opportunities to stop. It explicitly warned you about the legal consequences of uploading altered data. You didn't just fall into a trap. You climbed over the safety railing, unlocked the gate, and jumped. You validated the fraud yourself. There isn't a lawyer on earth who can argue entrapment against those timestamps." Trent stared at the screen. The digital proof of his own arrogance was glowing in high definition. He opened his mouth to speak, but he had nothing left. No lies, no excuses, but I wasn't finished. I had one final layer of the onion to peel back. "And just so we are clear," I said, closing the laptop, "even if you had the money, even if the document was real, even if you hadn't tried to defraud the firm, you still wouldn't be a partner." Trent blinked, confused. "What? Of course I would. I was buying in." "No," I said. "You were buying into a program that I dismantled 3 hours ago." I picked up the final document from the table. It was an internal memo with today's date, stamped by the new board of directors, which was just me. "Last night, after I finalized the acquisition of the Waverly debt, my first act as the controlling interest was to restructure the corporate bylaws," I explained. "I identified the buy-in partner track as a high-risk liability, essentially a predatory scheme to fleece vanity investors. I filed a motion to dissolve the program effective immediately. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the position of junior buy-in partner no longer exists at Waverly & Company." I looked at my brother, who was now trembling. "Your biggest brag was that you were the new partner," I said. "But you were bragging about a job that had already been deleted. You were never going to be a partner. Trent, you were just a mark." The realization hit him. The partner title he had used to bully our father, to mock me, to preen before society. It was a ghost. It was gone. I walked over to him. I stood toe-to-toe with the brother who had made me feel small for my entire life. I looked at his expensive suit, his manicured haircut, his empty eyes. "So," I said, my voice level and final. "Actually, you are fired." It wasn't a catchphrase. It wasn't a joke. It was a corporate fact. I nodded to Miles. "Please escort Mr. Lawson from the building. His security badge has already been deactivated. He is not to access any company systems, and if he returns to the premises without an appointment, you are to call the police for trespassing." Miles stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, this way." Trent looked at Graham. "Dad, do something." Graham looked down at his shoes. He was a tenant now. He had no power. He couldn't save anyone. "Go, son," Graham whispered. "Just go." Trent let out a sound of pure frustration, a guttural cry of a man who had lost the game he thought he rigged. He spun around and stormed out of the room, Miles following close behind him like a shadow. The room was suddenly very quiet. Just me, my parents, and the hum of the air conditioner. I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. I didn't say goodbye. There was no need. The transaction was complete. "Adeline," Graham called out as I reached the door. His voice was cracked, broken. "Please, come home. We can have dinner. We can talk about the lease. Just come home." I stopped. I looked back at the boardroom. I saw the water pitcher in the corner where I used to stand. I saw the empty chairs. I saw two people who had built a shrine to their own vanity and were now living in its ruins. "I am not coming home, Graham," I said. "I have my own home. I just stopped by to close the ledger." I pushed the doors open and walked out. I walked through the lobby of Hawthorne Crest. I walked past the reception desk where Trent had joked I should work. I walked past the security guards who nodded at me with new respect. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the building and stepped out onto the street. The air outside was crisp and clean. The sun was shining, bright and blinding. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't smell of old money and desperation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl in the corner. I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the maintenance cost. I was the architect. I was the lender. And I was free. I looked back at the towering building one last time, thinking of the family inside who were just beginning to understand the price of their choices. They used to say I was the dark cloud over the family. They used to say I was bad luck. I smiled, turning toward my car. "My family used to call me bad luck," I whispered to the wind, "but now luck has changed hands." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Adeline's revenge. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.